Hello, everyone. Um, it's really great to be here. I'm very excited for today's talk and to moderate one of the topics that personally I'm super excited about and really shifted very quickly in today's industry. And also the pace of changes and adoption of AI is something really unprecedented. In today's conversation, we will talk about the relationship between agentic AI and identities. Um, few things before we'll get started. So we would love to for the entire audience to ask questions. In the bottom right side, there is a question bar where you can interact and ask questions. And as the moderator, I will do my best to cover all of those questions. And we also have teams that will reply some of those questions as we go. So we'll start with a short introductions, and then we'll see the latest research from Forrester and some panel discussion and Q&A. So together with me, we have Geoff Cairns, who is a principal analyst at Forrester. He's been leading research at the intersection between identity, risk, and governance, and I'm very excited for him to present some of his researches and a greater perspective on the industry. And from the practitioner side, we have Jonathan Jaffe, who I know from many years. He's the CISO at Lemonade, and he's been one of the most innovative CISOs that I've met with a unique vision, not only into how security should operate, but also how security products themselves should evolve in the future, and was a great partner for us at Token. So great to have you both here. All right. So I will pass now the stage to Geoff to present the latest research from Forrester, and then we will move into the panel question.
Thanks, Itamar, and thanks again for having me here today. I think before we delve into our main part of the discussion here, I just want to kind of provide a little bit of a backdrop around some of the things that are influencing the direction. And I want to start out by just kind of re-emphasizing probably some things that are pretty abundantly aware in terms of the current state of machine identity management and some of the challenges that enterprises today are facing today. So obviously the scale is just growing exponentially. The growth of machine identities outpacing human identities. And when I'm saying machine identities here, again, it's non-human identities. We can talk about that a little bit further. But, here we're talking about machine identities really outpacing human identities by a factor of anywhere from 45 to 1 to upwards. I've seen 92 to 1 as in some other research studies. So again, no doubt about it, that scale is hugely disproportionate and continuing to increase. Obviously, the speed with which things are operating, when you're talking machine-to-machine speeds and the need to communicate, that provides more emphasis on kind of the operational stakes and risks, if you will. But it also is being compounded by the fact that you're talking about short-lived credentials, ephemeral identities. Everything is speeding up, right? And then the scope for these NHIs, the variety of environments that they're in, whether it's cloud, IT, DevOps, OT, you've got many more stakeholders involved. You've got different authentication mechanisms, different lifecycle processes. So the scope and diversity really adds challenge. And all this contributes to really identity sprawl, right? Fragmented visibility, overprivileged NHIs, unmanaged credentials, and increased risk. And that's what obviously attackers are exploiting today. And that's again with the current state. Now you go ahead and add in, layer in, if you will, agentic AI systems that are acting autonomously, adapting to new context, reason across complex inputs, and persist over time. Means we're not just managing that access, we're managing the intent, the behavior, and the trust. So obviously these attributes create added complexity in making NHI identity management much more challenging, but also obviously emphasizing a more critical and crucial role that identity management plays in protecting against these new AI threats that are emerging. And just to kind of touch on some of those threats, you'll see listed here some of the real threats that are going on. Goal hijacking, where agents are manipulated via prompt injection or poison data. We've got memory corruption with flawed decisions based on tampered knowledge. Something we'll, I'm sure, touch on more here is the unrestrained agency and privilege. That's core to identity and access management's role here. But agents being granted excessive permissions that can cause, extreme damage and cascading effects. So continuing on, the deception, agents being able to sort of lie to admins, manipulate logs, bypass the controls. And then lastly, resource exhaustion, agents consuming compute or bandwidth and degrading performance. And I think one interesting dynamic here is the human in the loop and what that will do in terms of resource exhaustion. So something, again, we might touch on a little bit later in the conversation as a risk to enterprises. So just quickly to introduce Forrester's approach here, we've created and introduced a new model, Agentic AI Enterprise Guardrails for Information Security, so AEGIS. It's a framework designed to help CISO secure, govern, and manage AI agents and related infrastructure. So you'll see here it consists of comprised of 6 domains, and governance and identity and access management are fundamental here in our belief on how this needs to evolve and grow. And the framework itself, it revolves around principles of least agency, continuous risk management, and validation of intent. And these are all things that, again, go back to being able to manage the risk associated with those threats that we identified previously. Just to drill in just a little bit deeper on the IAM component of this, again, it's not just about the access, it's about the context, the agency, and the adaptability. So we need to be able to have systems that can dynamically respond to agent behavior and enforce least privilege in real time, integrate with AI governance tools. So definitely need to augment and modernize identity security programs with these IAM requirements that are listed here in mind. And then I just did want to kind of close out quickly by, emphasizing that the core elements that are needed to machine identity management today, and in a lot of organizations, again, are a bit immature in their approach as it exists today to even the more static machine identities. But these are foundational elements that organizations, enterprises need to start to get in place and start to capitalize on. And they'll provide some of the building blocks and fundamentals that still come back to addressing the agentic AI challenges that I've outlined earlier. So it really starts with discovery and centralized visibility, getting a hold on the inventory of those machine identities, non-human identities, and the overall identity lifecycle that revolves around these things. Things are going to continue to accelerate, as we talked earlier, and that identity lifecycle management in terms of being able to do just in time, just enough access, all in an automated fashion and in an orchestrated fashion becomes extremely critical. The underlying systems here are going to rely increasingly on cryptography and public key cryptography. So secrets and key management will not go away. I think that remains to be a fundamental component that you need to have underlying and supporting these systems. The frameworks and how those are implemented will continue to evolve. But at the end of the day, that cryptography is a key element. I think continuing to build off least privilege controls and driving them into least agency, as we talked about, is going to be another key evolution. But it needs to start with the least privilege controls and some of the core zero trust principles. And then finally, again, in a continuous fashion, you need the threat intelligence layer that's come into play here. So augmenting all your protective controls with that continuous threat intelligence, being able to take real-time action and act on risks on an ongoing basis in a continuous fashion. So again, all these things add up to kind of the starting point, if you will, I think, for starting to face down the agentic AI future and some of the security challenges that will no doubtedly arise. So with that little bit of introduction and background, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, great. Geoff, this was absolutely great. And before we'll get into the questions, I'm just curious, because this research, it feels, for me at least, a little bit different than other innovations that you're researching in terms of the pace of adoption. Have you felt like during the research there was a different type of um, conceptions that will change during time when you were talking with the market and looking in different companies?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's still ongoing, right? It's very early days. There's so much going on. Things are shifting and changing so quickly, evolving rapidly. So again, yeah, we just put the framework out itself a few weeks back, and even since then, you've seen different announcements, different things coming down. Um, you know, obviously the standards and protocols continue to evolve. So
Yeah,
just a lot going on, very rapid
yeah,
pace here.
yeah, for sure. And also we see it in our customers' environment and how they adopt agents, non-human identities, and just the pace. Organization that didn't have any footprint 4 months ago, today have multiple agents, multiple ecosystem. Some of them are still not production, and we can talk about it as part of the panel. But we do see this rapid pace of adoption that could be also a bit chaotic in my perspective. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about it as well.
And I do think, just to bring it back a little bit, we are talking about some of the most forward-looking stuff, and these autonomous agents. That's still, again, a very evolutionary process there. I bring it back that, yeah, we're seeing greater volumes for sure. Most of those are not quite at the agentic AI level, right, in terms of a majority of these things. But that said, given the pace, you definitely need to get on top of things early.
Exactly. And maybe let me bring it now to Jonathan. I'm curious, how do you define uh, agentic AI, and why do you see it as fundamentally we need to look at it in a fundamentally change of how we think about identity and trust in the enterprise?
I think when I think of agentic services, I think of something that can reason, something that at some point is going to come up with a conclusion, and probably in the not so distant future, be able to take actions. So similar to humans, it becomes less predictable. It's non-linear.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think when I look at the different layers of agents, it's almost the same flexibility sometimes that human has, but with the scalability that machines has. So it's continuously taking actions and
And one more feature, which is it's not afraid of getting fired. It's not yet aware that you can kill it.
yeah, that's a good point.
Accountability has a lot to do with security.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sure that as part of we're going to talk about the life cycle management and process of identities of agents, which is basically the life cycle of agents. So there is some type of firing agents, but I'm sure that
Yeah.
look a bit.
Well, I think what we have to do is build in some sort of self-awareness so it knows that it might die, but you don't want it to be smart enough to figure out how to get around that because it's so afraid of being killed. So that's probably 6 years in the future.
Love it, love it, Geoff. And any perspective from your side about the definition of agent and what you shared before, that you see probably more of AI workflows than the full-blown agentic AI. So can you share a little bit about the different characteristic of agentic AI?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of those attributes and some of what Jonathan was just mentioning. I think obviously, you're talking about systems comprised of AI models, rules, architectures, and other tools that are being brought together that flexibly plan and resolve goals by taking actions, right, with an increasing level of autonomy. So that increasing level of autonomy, that persistence that was mentioned, I totally agree with you guys in terms of this is a hybrid type of identity. It's, if you look at the spectrum, kind of human on one end, true machine, static machine identities on the other end. You've got this, agentic AI agents somewhere in the middle. And again, even within those agents, various degrees to which they're operating that brings them closer or to one end of the spectrum or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and I think now if we connect agents into non-human identities. So my question for you, Jonathan, is that what do you find today the biggest blind spot when it comes to securing actually non-human identities, when we seeing now more and more agents are acting independently and generating identities?
The first problem to solve for me, and I think most people in my position, is just getting visibility into the proliferation of everything related to agentic AI. Everything from agents themselves to MCP servers, and everything in between. That's the biggest initial problem to solve.
So visibility into your to your agents' identities. Yeah, that's I completely agree with you. I think that beside visibility, we want to have some type of accountability into those agents. So associated with a sponsor or with someone who is connected and responsible for those agents.
Yeah,
Right?
well, look, you always need visibility first. If you don't know what's going on, you can't go to the next step. So,
Yeah.
and then the next step is, of course, attribution.
Yeah.
Right? Knowing that there's an agent and it exists and it is who it presents itself to be. And once you have that, then you go through the journey of, I can't believe I overuse the word journey. Journey is something you take on a trip. You shouldn't use it in business. The next step, of course, in any identity lifecycle is then scoping the access. And I actually really like the term that Geoff used. I think it was something like, what was it? Agency, least agency. That's a nice term. So scoping the agent is the third step after this, but visibility is the first. And I'm sure we'll talk about life cycle in a bit, but they're not equal. You can't do 3 if you haven't done 2, and you can't do 2 if you haven't done 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that all agents are equal? I'm just curious in terms of visibility into agents. Is there like a different areas where you are more concerned than others when you think about gaining visibility into them first? You mentioned a bit of MCP. So what do you think is like the core, the first place to look at when it comes to visibility into your agents?
Boy, mentally, I've just divided the realms into endpoints and our cloud environment. I know there are more domains there, but those are the first 2 areas that I'm really focused on. I know there are SaaS services that use agents, but right now I'm focusing on what's on the endpoint. What are the employees using locally on their systems? Has somebody installed an MCP server and she's got a key to Snowflake, and now we have no control or visibility into what she's doing. Maybe she's not going through a proxy. And has somebody installed something into one of our cloud environments and is doing something similar? But you can expand well beyond that. But those are the two areas that I'm focused on right now.
Yeah. All right. That makes totally sense. Geoff, when you think about the connection and the blind spot at securing non-human identities in today's in agent AI era, what do you find is the blind spot? I assume it's visibility. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely echo what Jonathan said in terms of it starts with discovery, visibility, getting an understanding and inventory. And then I think, second to that is trying to prioritize and set actionable, direction, right? After you've got that kind of inventory. And then it starts to harken back to, making sure you have some of the fundamentals in place. And we can talk about, the overprivileged aspect of things and the need to drive better life cycle management, hygiene, and all those things start to come into play. But absolutely agree. It starts with just getting an understanding of what's out there, and so that you can assess your risks and understand how to prioritize.
Yeah, I agree, and I see many organizations are starting by creating this architecture of how they want to manage agents, and sometimes it's almost a bit disconnected. It's always disconnected from reality if you don't have at first understanding what you have and how you're consuming AI. So I do agree with both of you that visibility is the first step into creating a better program for your identities.
Yeah, if I can add, generally when you look at risk, first you have to group things into like categories, and you can't do that if you don't have an inventory. You can't make that framework if you don't start to see patterns of how things present risk to you, and then clump them together, set it aside, and deal with that, and then see others, clump them together. Now you've got these two risk categories and how to deal with them. But you need that visibility. You need the inventory before you can make that framework.
I completely agree. And maybe as a follow-up question, because you mentioned risk, so what do you find as the most concerning attack vector for that agentic AI introduced in today's enterprise and that we are less prepared for?
I don't feel like I know, because the attacks haven't happened very much. I think most practitioners, they respond to what they read or what they see in their own environment. But what we see is going on externally, which usually is through thread in feeds or news articles. That's usually what makes us think, oh, okay, that's what I need to focus on. Otherwise, it's hypothetical if things aren't. And I think it's so new that we're seeing some risk. We read about some agentic services that have deleted databases. I forgot if that was with Lovable or Replete or somebody just using Cursor. I can't recall, but we read about things like that, and then we respond. But I don't know what the big risks are yet, because I don't think it's been prolific enough to really present a lot of dangers. When I say a lot, I mean enough to make the news regularly.
Got it. Geoff, any perspective from your side? I agree with Jonathan that in general, this new phase of technology is relatively new, so the threats are usually a bit more theoretical than already happening. But I'm sure that you've seen some already situation in real time. So I'm curious, how do you look right now at the greater attack vectors in agentic identity?
Yeah, I think some of the things that come to mind are just sort of policy drift, things changing within the environment, misconfiguration. So, I mean, it still comes back to a lot of very fundamental pieces that I think start to play in. And I think the thing with the agentic piece is what's terrifying is sort of that cascading aspect, right? You sort of get it. You could envision where things start to build off, excuse me, one sort of a attack vector leads into another, and then you've got cascading failures and different events happening. And it goes from both technical back into business. You're starting to impact the business in terms of, people's trust in the services, the underlying services, the information, the data that's being shared, all types of things. So I think it's sort of that loss of control as you move into these situations that ultimately are probably initially, coming back to things like, unrestrained privilege and, as I say, policy drift, misconfiguration. But one other thing I did touch on earlier was the resource exhaustion. And I think early days, right, it's going to be fundamental and very important to keep a human in the loop in most of these things, especially in the more sensitive type implementations and deployments. And so I think that has the potential, right, for resource exhaustion from a human level, which is maybe a little bit ironic considering what we're talking about.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's interesting that we're looking at some of those threats not necessarily as malicious activities, but just as an operational exhaustion and mistrust from our general team about the validity of the agents and what they're actually doing. And also, I agree with you. Also, I believe that traceability will be a big challenge as we will see more multi-agent interaction. So understanding who actually initiate that activity of agents chaining. How can I go back to that person that initiated?
Which agent do I get to fire?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Jeff, do you have any real world scenario of an agent that going wrong, whether it's through misconfiguration or policy drift, as you said, and how would it look like?
I mean, I think kind of maybe an example would be kind of a financial institution that's using an AI agent to automate some fraud detection and transaction approvals. That agent might have access into sensitive customer data, different transaction systems, different internal APIs. And it may be integrated with something that's even third-party analytics platform. So you start to have that combination of things that potentially opens up a bit of Pandora's box when you start to have a bit of a misconfiguration. So if you have a misconfigured IAM role in there, AI starts to gain the right access into the production databases and customer notification systems. Maybe simultaneously there's an API key that's leaked. A lot of that going around the news lately.
Yeah.
And so the attackers start to capitalize on that, use that compromised key to impersonate the analytics platform and inject malicious prompts back into the AI system. So you can see that then opens up to fraudulent transactions, misleading alerts, all kinds of havoc that, again, security issues for sure, but more fundamentally ruin the brand and the trust of customers. So maybe a bit of a hyperbole there, but I do think these are the types of situations that we could find ourselves in with, again, this sort of cascading nature of the.
I agree, and I love it because it's the first time I don't hear an example about the CEO salary that getting access, right?
I was going to use that.
Yeah. But yeah, another like good example of agents that going wrong, I think, will be in the space of cost optimization, right? You will see cloud cost optimization that will now start to take in actions. Will remove maybe some logs and other applications that are super important for security operations, and we'll have some security effect. So you want to set the controls and measure, I believe, the intent of the agent for against their actions, and do it also in a time-based manner to make sure that things are not going too much out of control. And I also love the idea about at the beginning to put some people in that process for some actions that could be a bit um, too intense. Um, Jonathan, any example from? I know that Lemonade is one of the strongest adopters of AIs today. Any agents, not that went wrong, of course, but agents that you're leveraging in your ecosystem today that you find interesting?
Well, I'm not comfortable talking about our internal IP. We definitely build and use agents in a very important way. I can talk about what the security team has built, which I think is interesting. I can give one example of how we've built an agent that dispenses with dependabots. One of something that GitHub offers is a listing of CVEs that relate to packages. We're building our own agentic platform, and one of the collections of agents will look at dependabots and actually evaluate them for actual exploitability based upon our code. So you can see we have a collection of agents. Now, we don't yet let those take action. For example, soon they will be able to issue a pull request, but they wouldn't be able to approve it. But we're using quite a bit of agentic technology within Lemonade. And there are risks with that. There are definitely risks. I think if I look at the questions here, I think somebody had asked about how you control agents without limiting them so much that they're useless. And I think part of that is understanding the intent of an agent and validating whether or not an agent's intent matches with the policies that you might have. So understanding agentic intent and then limiting what the agent can do, having some sort of control mechanism inside and outside of the agent that understands the intent of what the agent's going to do against some sort of policy that you have written that's steadfast.
Oh, love it. So having this process to authenticate and make sure that the authorize the agent before taking those actions based on the intent and against also the policies that you created and the set of controls. Yeah, I think that's a good approach on tackling and making sure that those agents are not going completely wrong, but also not being powerless, as people asked here. I'm curious, Geoff, um, how can enterprise have controls and governance over every AI agent, and what does that particularly look like in a multi-cloud, multi-agent environment?
Yeah, I think this is a bit of where the rubber hits the road, right? I think there's a challenge here that's not only technical in terms of that discovery and inventory on the technical level, but making sure that you've got kind of the deep reach within the organization to understand and have stakeholder input and buy-in. So I really think it kind of starts with sort of the fundamental identity governance within the organization, how the organization is looking and communicating from a people and process perspective, and then starting to apply the technologies that can help really to increase that level of visibility and insight, give more prescript guidance on risks so that the right evaluations and determinations can be made. So ultimately, it's kind of a bit of a foundational IAM program for governance. I think that starts it. I think the other thing here with governance that's key, and it sort of goes back to, again, this policy-based approach. You need to start to group things and manage things. So as much as you can integrate, automate, orchestrate, and drive down the level of noise in the environment from the things that you can have control over, I think then allows you to focus a little bit more keenly on those things that might be a little bit more evolutionary in terms of the agency with which they're acting and which you need them to act, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, and we talked a little bit about auditing and logging and making sure that every agent, we can trace them back. I think that the other important things to emphasize is to have an independent and separate identity for each one of our agents. What we see today a lot is those shadow or those agents that are being leveraged on behalf of people, on behalf of other identities, and then it's hard to separate between activities that was initiated by an agent or by an individual, right?
The right approach is, first of all, your agent should always have to authenticate against any service that's going to communicate, whether that be another agent, an MCP server, a database, whatever it is. The agent has to identify itself, and you would have a third party like the equivalent of an IDP for agents. But then, of course, when it's making a connection and if it's doing something on behalf of another service or a person, it needs to then lower its ability, its scope to whatever is appropriate for that entity, be it a person or another machine. Right? And so authorization should be multi-level. First, are you authorized as an agent to even talk to me? Then if you are, is the person or the entity on behalf of whom you're making this request, is it authorized, or is he authorized, or is she authorized to do this? And then it gets quite complicated, but then you bring intent in. There are multiple layers of this authorization.
Yeah.
I agree, and that's where some of that complexity I think gets into is you've got end users. Are you taking permissions delegated from the end user, or is the agent able to access information on its own? How do you regulate, what information it can have access to when it comes to maybe sensitive data or personal data? So, totally agree with Jonathan that's really where it gets very complex. But at the end of the day, too, coming back to your point, Itamar, I think the ownership, the accountability needs to be established so that you've got, at least in the early stages here, you've got human folks that can weigh in and understand and take responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely, and following up on this, we said that we want to cover also life cycle management. So I'm curious, Jonathan, how do you see? So for human identities, we have a lot of life cycle management processes like onboarding, offboarding. What do you think? How should it look like for autonomous agents? What should be the process for life cycle?
I think it follows the same general approach. When you onboard is a form of registration. So when you onboard a human, you're essentially registering that human in the organization, and then you're assigning that person privileges, access to things. And then when she leaves, you're offboarding that person, and all of her access goes away. I don't see it being meaningfully different from agents. Any agent that's going to be brought into the organization has to be registered, and so we have to have the ability to control whether or not an agent can function if it's not been registered, and tools will appear that do that. And then scoping, we've spoken about a lot, so that's kind of like the middle life cycle part. This agent needs more access or less access. That has to go through an approval process. That often will come with developers. In fact, I think there are a couple of really good questions that have come up. One about, do we think developers will really consistently work with security before rolling agents in production? If you ask a developer, she may say yes, but she won't, because security is friction. And so there's that balance of security has to be able to put controls, but prior to putting controls, there has to be observability, there has to be visibility. So to the person who asked that question, development won't first think about going to security unless there's some controls. Maybe, hopefully it's a carrot, sometimes it's a stick, and then it will happen over time.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that the user experience question of, because for human IDP standpoint, it's very like there is a strong incentive for people to leverage the IDP for single sign-on, not remembering all those passwords. It will be interesting to see how it's going to look like with your agents ecosystem, and how can you give the carrot to allow developers to adopt easier in a more efficient and easier way agents, right?
Yeah, there are tools being developed. I've seen a couple already, so I know that technology will make its way into enterprises.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, Geoff. So when it comes to frameworks and governance models, do you recommend for requesting and securing what AI agents are allowed to do, and how should enterprise enforce least privilege for machines? So really, the question here is what frameworks, and let's talk a little bit about least privilege, which I think it's one of the greatest questions when it comes to agents.
Yeah, well, for Forrester clients, you can start with the Aegis framework that I mentioned. But I think one thing that I would definitely recommend everyone look at is kind of the NIST AI risk management framework. I think that's a good context and a good level setting. It promotes the trustworthy AI. It helps to tell you what you should include in terms of functionality for your governance framework to a large degree. So I think that'd be my probably top recommendation across the board to start with that framework.
Got it. And when you think about enforcing of least privilege, so I think the interesting question about agents, and I would love, Jonathan, for you to also jump in. So do we need to reinforce least privilege continuously with agents? Is it once uh, every audit? How should we strategize on least privilege for agents?
Yeah, I think least privilege, to my mind, everything becomes sort of continuous. You need the context on an ongoing, real-time basis, near real-time basis. And I think getting back to, and I think this might have been asked in one of the chat questions, but in terms of least agency, I think really you're building off of least privilege by taking it to another level in terms of really bounding the actions of the agent. So again, comes back to context and intent, and managing that agency relative to those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe let's move for a bit more future outlook, and then we will also cover some of those questions. There's a lot of questions here. So I'm curious, Geoff, in terms of um, regulation, and do you anticipate any regulations or standards that will emerge in the around agents' identities, and how should the enterprise get ready for them, to prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of on the higher level, there's a lot of things to keep an eye on. I think enterprise organizations should stay aware of things like the EU AI Act. There's an AI Accountability Act in Congress that's more targeted for national telecommunications and information systems. So I think these are all things that are emerging and things to keep an eye on. I mentioned the NIST framework too. I think that's another barometer, maybe not on the same level as those regulatory things, but something that can be used as a barometer. And I think beyond those, obviously in the technical realm, there's a ton of different activities going on with emerging standards. We've mentioned here already MCP. You've got agent to agent, which starts to build in terms of providing additional context around skills that can be used to make authorization decisions in agent to agent communications. And again, all this is underpinned by OAuth, and that is a standard that's been around originating with human identity, right? But it needs to continue to evolve and be updated to take into account, some more of these dynamic scenarios. So seeing a lot of movement in that area. So from a technical perspective, those would be a few of the standards and activities I'd keep an eye on.
Got it. And maybe in that connection between human and agent. So Jonathan, when you're thinking about the future, let's say 5 years from now, how do you think will be the relationship between humans and agentic AI and machine identities that are involving, and what will be the biggest risk, let's say 5 years from now? I know it's super futuristic and it's hard to predict the future, but what's your take on that?
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to having my first AI implant in 5 years. So I'll have AI assisted brain thoughts. But joking aside, 5 years is just too far out to predict. I'd feel like a jerk for making a prediction 5 years out. I do think, at least security practitioners, what we can do is start to use agentic services, or as we do Lemonade, build them ourselves. And that's probably the best way then to answer the second part of your question, is to outflank the competition. Because if you haven't wholeheartedly embraced agentic services in the next 3 years, you're going to be on a rapidly decreasing slope of productivity compared to your competitors. It's not just business, it's also in security. Your competitors are attackers, and they will be using agentic services to tirelessly conduct more and more sophisticated attacks that could look like old world attacks, like really sophisticated phishing, but they are also going to they're going to be new types of agentic attacks that we can't predict right now, but you can be certain that if you've got a chatbot, there's going to be a chatbot attacker that's trying to find the weaknesses in your chatbot.
Interesting. So that's the first time I hear it from that perspective, and yeah, I agree. Look, when today what we see is that almost every CISO that we talk with is being asked from the board and from their CIOs and CEOs to have this AI transformation, right? Because organization understanding that not adopt AI will be a major disadvantage for them, and will, if they will not adopt AI, they will die, if not quite slowly. And what we see, I think, that is different than any other technological revolution, in that here even the old-fashioned organizations are starting to adopt AI, and it's interesting to also think about it from security standpoint. That also here you want to have a competitive advantage and adopt AI as part of your stack to support that new threat. And what I also hearing from your standpoint is that on one hand, the existing security tool need to adapt, because the same type of attacks that and attack vectors they were solving are gonna adapt and be leveraged by AI, so more sophisticated phishing and other types of attacks. But then there will be also a new line of attacks that are completely different and needs a whole different set of tools and products.
Yeah, both of those things are going to happen
Yeah.
concurrently.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go through some of the questions here. So, Geoff, this one is for you. Someone from the crowd asked, what percent of enterprise have adopt or are adopting security controls along the line of what you presented? So, the question is, what is the percentage of the actual adoption of security controls in that space?
So I think it it becomes a little bit difficult to answer in terms of, like I said, I think some of these are built off existing controls, and a lot of organizations have some amount of identity controls in their environments today, albeit I would say, most not as robust or mature as they need to be. And that's just, again, for kind of the steady state, what we have today, given the level of, agents and not really forecasting ahead. For the agentic AI, where I'm talking about some of these other things, these are things that are still emerging, still being built. So I don't think there's anybody that would, stand up and say they have all those capabilities for sure, or, but it's an evolutionary, it's an evolutionary process. And again, I think starting with kind of some of the zero trust principles, I think maybe that's a gauge, right? How many, organizations have adopted kind of that zero trust approach, and it would be a very small subset of that would be starting to go down this agentic AI security path at this point. I do like was mentioned just earlier. I mean, this is going to be a competitive business imperative, and so whether you like it or not, you sort of have to get on board. And I do think that will drive rapid adoption.
Yeah. I agree. I think that the pace of the adoption will be faster, but we're still, as you said, in the early adopters phase today, or the more of the innovators. But it's important to get ahead of the curve. Another more technical question for you, Jonathan. So, how much entitlement, authorization, management should be externalized into the security layer versus kept inside of the agent own logic, in your perspective?
I wish I had a simple number. I don't, because I just don't have enough experience. I can tell you what we're thinking about, though. So if you imagine, for example, if your developers use Cursor, they're going to put prompts in there that limit or expand what the Copilot can do. You should think of Cursor as an agent. It's agentic. Security should actually be writing in the security policies in code, so they're in GitHub, and everybody's agent should be required to ingest those policies in addition to whatever the developer is writing himself. So to answer the question in a more direct way, security should still be a big part of the policy of what the individual agent does. So you can imagine there will be centralized policy stores that are made for agents. I'm certain of that. Those are being developed by various companies. But the developers themselves will also have some control, just like they do now when they have to upgrade packages that have vulnerabilities. So it will be a mix, but security should not be second to developers doing security, because that's always, it's not on their OKR list.
Yeah.
It is on yours in security.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying there's a shared responsibility model here that we should understand and manage better, where the agent developer should think about security as part of them, but we also need to give them the tools.
Yeah, it's not their specialty. So yes, you can train people, but in the end, developers are paid to produce product on time, right? And things that get in the way, they unintentionally will ignore those things or downplay them. So it will always be security's responsibility to take over most of security in AppSec.
Got it. Yeah. So we have a few more questions here. And Geoff and Jonathan, if there is something that's sticking out and you want to address, feel free to go ahead. I will just find a random one. All right. Will the average enterprise be able to invest in security controls in the absence of a prolific active threat. So basically, if there is not a real tangible event, does the security have the average security organization can invest in securing and setting controls to agents?
I think generally that doesn't happen. I think most organizations, including inside and security, respond to what they see there is happening to their peers, and for good reason. It's a game of probability. You don't have limitless funds, so you can't address every possible security issue. So you certain things are just getting your attention, like Scattered Spider. We're in insurance, and so Scattered Spider is targeting insurance companies, and so that gets my team's attention, and so we focus on that at the expense of something else that's not getting my attention. Budget comes with awareness of actual threats, and that usually comes from actual attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean on the company itself, but rather what comes up in news and threat feeds, and the mind share that we all have in security about what's going on.
Yeah, I think that another catalyzation to adoptions of agents will be more and more compliance, that framework that will then the security team will be a business enabler to a lot of those initiatives, right? So it's not
Okay.
only about risk reduction, but also about how allowing the organization become more efficient and allowing having more business. So I
Yeah.
think that compliance will for sure will be also something that will change the conversation internally.
I think you can count on three things in life: death, taxes, and EU regulation.
Yes.
And that EU regulation is probably what's going to drive some of the budget before there's an actual need.
Love it.
Yeah, I think building that business case and that justification becomes critical. And I think, as you're saying, kind of the elements around risk are one, and the security events are certainly one thing in a major aspect, but the ability to tie back into compliance and what that means in terms of the business implications for being out of compliance, as well as kind of the chances for increased productivity. I mean, these are things you can put into that business justification.
Yeah, 100%. So that was a really great conversation. We are out of time, so there are a lot of other questions that we didn't get the chance to cover. But thanks for the entire audience and for the participants, and Jeff and Jonathan. I really enjoyed today's talk, and thanks for bringing your perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great.
Geoff.
All right, thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.